North Left Sports Podcast back again with the second part of our two-part MLB offseason preview. We're jumping into the National League this time. We're going to start in the NL East. We're going to talk about the Atlanta Braves first. And there's a lot to talk about because they decided they wanted to take the Arizona Diamondbacks' entire farm system for Shelby Miller. And they wanted to decide they're going to just trade almost everyone on their team that's good, be really horrible until their new stadium, and make Freddie Freeman hate life. I'm more than willing to start the Free the Freeman Twitter page, Kyle, if you're willing to join with me. I thought they killed it in the Shelby Miller trade. I think Julio Teheran and Freddie Freeman are both on the block. Mm-hmm. I love picking up Ender Inciarte. I really like him a lot. He's a great outfielder, very well-rounded, fantastic defensively. But like a few teams in the National League, not much to talk about in terms of the offseason review in terms of how they're going to win this year.
Absolutely. Obviously, we all know about the trade that they made with the Angels as well to ship away Andrelton Simmons, who's kind of underachieved as far as the bat. Obviously, as we touched on the Angels during our last podcast, he's an incredible defensive player who definitely shores up a need for the Angels, but this is about the Atlanta Braves. They were also... let's see here. They got, Sean Newcomb back in that trade, Eric Ibar, and then they also got right-handed pitcher Chris Ellis. Let's go to that Shelby Miller trade really quickly. You had already mentioned Ender and Ciarte. They also got top pick Dansby Swanson and right-handed pitcher Aaron Blair, who both have very high outlooks.
I really like Aaron Blair a lot. I think he could be a nice number 3 in the majors.
They also traded Christian Bethancourt to the Padres for right-handed pitcher Casey Kelly and catcher Ricardo Rodriguez. Re-signed A.J. Przinsky, who will not die. Traded Cameron Maybin to the Tigers for Ian Kroll. And then signed infielder Kelly Johnson as well as catcher Tyler Flowers, formerly of the Chicago White Sox. I'm looking at some of their lineups here, and you kind of hit the nail on the head. There's a lot to be desired here. They are definitely in full-on tank mode. Freddie Freeman, Julio Teheran, those are both guys that are probably going to get moved, like you had mentioned. Is there any hope for, some sort of crazy uptick for this team? Do they have any chance to even compete for the non-last spot, or is it in their best interest to just tank and try and get another top pick?
No, they want to lose every game.
Yeah,
I mean, without saying it out loud, they want a top 3, top 1, top 5 pick. Mm-hmm. They have incredible pitching depth in the minors, something like I haven't seen forever. And quick note on Casey Kelly, formerly the number 1 prospect, moved in the Adrian Gonzalez trade.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, failed prospect when the Red Sox traded for him a long time ago. But, the Braves, not much going on. All they're doing is just fleecing the Diamondbacks over and over again and making smart rebuilding decisions. So good for them on that. Next, we're going to jump to the other team in this division that is tanking and talk about the Philadelphia Phillies for a second. They, on the other hand, I think they're in for a little bit quicker of a rebuild just because they had one major piece to trade last offseason in Cole Hamels, and they got a fantastic return from the Texas Rangers, and they traded Ken Giles, who's a fantastic closer with 5 years of control, but they traded him to the Astros for another fantastic haul headlined by Vincent Velasquez, who I think is going to be a very good starter. They have some nice prospects on the way. Franco's already up. J.P. Crawford's on the way. But once again, like the Atlanta Braves, they are looking to lose, and they are looking to rebuild, clear off some of that money, and start anew, and hopefully challenge for another World Series in the next couple of years after they rebuild.
Absolutely. They also, in that Ken Giles trade, got former number 1 overall pick Mark Appel and left-handed pitcher Brett Oberholzer. They also acquired right-handed pitcher Charlie Morton from the Pirates.
Could be mid-season trade fodder right there.
That's kind of what I was thinking, which is another smart move by them, not something you'd normally associate with the Phillies. They also acquired right-handed pitcher Jeremy Hellickson from the Diamondbacks, who, a couple years ago, people thought this was going to be a pretty nice third starter. Just hasn't been there lately. So they, like you said, they do have some interesting guys. I mean, you touched on Franco. They have Herrera playing in left field. They do have an elite center fielder as far as defensively in Peter Borges. And we talked about, some of the guys that they are going to have call up, in the vein of Jorge Alfaro, Nick Williams, who were acquired in that Cole Hamels trade, but they also have Aaron Nola, who showed a lot last year. I was kind of impressed with him. I think he kind of caught people off guard. We knew he was a good prospect, but I don't think we really expected the immediate success he was able to have. He kind of fell off towards the end, but him and Eichhoff, who they also acquired from the Rangers, could make a nice little building rotation for them going forward in the future. A lot to like in Philadelphia.
Yeah, if you're a Phillies fan, look out for Nolan Eichardt. I think Nola could be another Cole Hamels type pitcher with a worse changeup, maybe a lower K rate because of it, but still a very solid pitcher. And they have some young guys to look forward to. Crawford should be up this year, and he's one of the top shortstop prospects in all of baseball, especially after Corey Seager, so who we'll touch on later as well. So next, we're going to jump to the Miami Marlins, who are always an intriguing sleeper team because how they like to build and develop superstars and not care about depth because they don't spend money. Jose Fernandez is coming back, and he's going to be the ace of the staff. They're going to have Stanton, hopefully coming back from injury, is going to be the ace of the batting order. They have a great outfield still, especially if Ozuna can rebound. And they didn't really make that many moves outside of the big signing to get Wei Yang Chang from the Baltimore Orioles. I think he's going to flourish in the National League and become a nice number 3 type starter, but that's where they kind of run into problems where, in my opinion, they lack some rotation depth.
Absolutely. I mean, they also signed third baseman Chris Johnson. However, they did lose right-handed pitcher Henderson Alvarez in free agency, who, he's one of those guys who doesn't dominate anybody, but he's just very effective. So, I mean,
if he comes back from injury with Oakland, that could be a nice signing for Oakland, like we touched on. So they didn't want to potentially buy low and have some mid-season rotation depth coming back. So that's another thing how we mentioned they're not big on the spending money for a lot of times.
Yeah, and so they do have some. They have kind of an interesting lineup here. I mean, you've got D. Gordon at second. Prado looks like he's going to play third. You've got Hechavarria playing shortstop. He had a really hot year.
Started off
at the
great.
Start of last year. That was crazy. We're still waiting on the power to come for Christian Yelich, so we'll see if this is the year. They were heavily rumored to be trying to deal Marcell Ozuna, so keep an eye on that to see if he gets moved. And another player we had not mentioned was Carter Capps, who they acquired in the Logan Morrison trade with Seattle a couple years back. He was a pretty dominant reliever last year, probably going to step into the closing role for them at some point this year. I'm not sure if he'll start there, but just another guy to keep an eye on. They do like to deal these kind of guys when they're starting to get out of the race, so he could be another guy to get moved. But all in all, I just don't think their lineup's strong enough to make that run.
I think the lineup is not the issue compared to the pitching. The thing to know with Carter Capps is his unique delivery causes hitters to really be confused that he's allowed to almost jump hop off the mound.
They told him he couldn't do that.
Yeah, and then he still had a modified version of it. They said was okay, and he had like a 48% strikeout rate or something insane.
Helps when you throw 100.
Yes, it does. He's fantastic upside. Him and AJ Ramos is a very nice 1-2 punch to finish the game. Kyle, does Mike Stanton stay healthy? And if he does, do you think that he will go over 50 home runs as I do?
Yeah, if he's healthy, it's a no-brainer to me. I mean, he's been knocking on the door. He's, 24 now? Still so young, so in his prime. He's just an animal. I mean, this is a guy who could play any sport and be a physical specimen in just about any sport. So, total stud. I think he stays healthy. I think a lot of his injuries have been a little bit freaky and a little bit... I don't know. I would say it just doesn't seem to be the same injury over and over again. I mean, we all know about the hit he took in the head. I mean, how do you control that? I mean, that's not on him at all. So I think it's a little bit fluky. I fully expect him to hit 50 home runs. Fantasy stud this year.
No doubt. Next, speaking of fantasy studs, we're going to jump to the Washington Nationals, who have arguably, along with Mike Trout, the best player in baseball, and Bryce Harper, who finally ascended to his King of the Mountain throne that we've been waiting on. Also, like Stanton, stayed off the disabled list for the first time, maybe it seemed like, for his whole career, and he dominated. And someone who didn't stay off the disabled list was Anthony Rendon, who had a near MVP 2014 and had a horrible 2015. This is a team that had a lot of change in the offseason. They brought in Daniel Murphy. They lost Jordan Zimmerman. Steven Strasburg's an upcoming free agent. They have Lucas Giolito, a big-time pitching prospect on the way. They signed Steven Drew to be the backup middle infielder so they could block Trey Turner some more, which is just a fantastically bad idea. I did like the signings they had in the bullpen, specifically Sean Kelly. Very nice K rate. as a reliever. Good year in San Diego last year. They brought him to do a small deal to hopefully set up Papelbon as he finishes out his career, and they don't re-sign him so they can get a closer that isn't starting to fall. But Kyle, what did you think about the Nationals' move specifically in the infield in terms of getting rid of Escobar, bringing in Murphy, signing Drew? I just feel like that they're kind of blocking Trey Turner, who could be a nice, very athletic potential leadoff guy for that lineup.
Yeah, I was really surprised. I mean, they said goodbye to Ian Desmond, which I thought was a little bit surprising.
And he still isn't signed,
yeah, he still
which
isn't
is
signed.
so odd to me.
What?
I think the draft pick compensation, when they
crazy.
renegotiate labor, that's gone. The players won't stand for this anymore. I think
Yeah.
that draft pick compensation is going to be reworked or completely removed.
Why is Gallardo getting signed though? I mean, they gave up the 14th pick, the Orioles did, to go pick up him. I don't see.
He's a pitcher.
I guess, but I mean, a shortstop who's a good fielder and has a bat. And the thing to remember about
He's
Desmond
declined
is
3 straight
Yeah,
years,
I was going to
though.
say he has declined 3 straight years. Guess what? Giovanni Gallardo's declined 6 straight years. So I mean, like you could say that. I mean, now one thing is you're probably going to pull up the stats and say, oh, Gallardo had probably one of his best years he's had in a long time. Watch the dude pitch. He struggled to do anything. He was very good around the plate. He got lucky because the Texas Rangers have a pretty good defense. And he benefited from that. He pitches with a lot of heart, I'll give you that. But, I mean, the stuff is definitely declining. And they could have easily signed Henderson Alvarez for a way less risky deal and probably got a pretty similar player, all things considered. So
I think it might be easier in a lot of teams' minds to fix a pitcher as opposed to a hitter.
yeah.
Because a pitcher, you can maybe work on a new pitch or re-grip the changeup or tell them to focus downward angles on pitches to lower the zone. Whereas with someone like Ian Desmond, for instance, with his declining rate stats for 3 years and as a shortstop, he's only okay at best. He was much better the second half last year, where he only had 2 errors as
Hey,
opposed
batted
to 20.
262 the second half.
Yeah, I mean, he was way better in the second half for sure. I agree. I just don't understand in general. Like, if you're going to block Trey Turner, just bring back Desmond for a year. I mean, it makes more sense than that than as opposed to bringing in Steven Giroux after everyone's been signed already. When Trey Turner, if you don't want to start, can at least be the backup guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Some other moves they made where they traded Drew Storm to the Blue Jays for Ben Revere. You'd already pointed out Sean Kelly. They also signed Yasmero Petit and Oliver Perez. They also acquired right-handed pitchers Trevor Gott and Michael Bradley from the Angels for Yunel Escobar. They did lose Jordan Zimmerman, as we know, and Doug Fister and Denard Spand in free agency, and presumably Ian Desmond. Looking at this lineup, though, it's pretty formidable. Ramos, solid catcher, nothing fantastic, but he's a solid guy to have in there. Zimmerman at the high. Well, actually, he's playing first this year.
Yeah, he's first now.
Yeah, so Daniel Murphy, I thought that was kind of an overpay. I didn't really understand that, especially for a team that could have used those resources anywhere else. Obviously, Rendon's going to be playing third. Worth, Revere, Harper in the outfield. We know about that starting pitching.
And speaking of Revere, that's another guy. You're going to trade a closer who very well may be better than Papelbon for a center fielder when you have Michael Taylor, who's shown great flashes of being a potential good starter. That's another guy you're blocking. You know what Ben Revere is. He's going to be okay on defense, no arm, no power, and if he doesn't walk, he's hitting 290 with a 310 on base. Like, that's not that good of a player.
That's all right, though.
I mean, at least Michael Taylor can slide over to left when Jason Worth gets hurt. That's just going to happen. But still, it's like they're just blocking their young prospects. And I do not like that when I think specifically Turner and Taylor are going to outperform Revere and either Espinoza at short, Steven Drew at short, whoever's going to be there. I think they both would outperform the veterans.
Yeah, and folks, if you don't know who Michael Taylor is, this is a failed prospect. He's been around for a very long time. He's a big guy. He's got a lot of natural raw power.
He finally showed something last year.
He did show something last year. I like it personally. I think you needed some insurance policy going into the year. Michael Taylor has a great spring. Maybe you get him in the mix, and maybe you look back on that Revere trade and say, hey, why'd you guys do that? But chances are there's always a center field needy team at the deadline, so you could always flip him or Taylor. So I like the insurance policy. Let's really quickly get to that rotation. Max Scherzer, Steven Strasburg, Gio. It looks like Joe Ross, and then Tanner Rourke finishes that out. They have Lucas Giolito coming up. Just a fantastic rotation if everyone stays healthy.
And
this
Bronson
could be their
and
year.
Royal, there's a fringe talk that he could beat out Roark. I don't think he will, but it's nice to see him get another shot after all the injuries.
Yeah, it is for sure. He was always a very solid pitcher. Was never overly effective, but he was just one of those guys he's one of the good guys in baseball. So you kind of like to see a guy like that have success.
And speaking of solid rotations, let's talk about maybe the best rotation in baseball, the New York Mets. Obviously, they lost in the World Series, but they had a fantastic season. A lot of their young players have really started to shine and show up in the majors, and they still have a few on the way. But this team completely revolves around the rotation, as it should when you have three potential aces, and you have Steven Matz, who has number 3, number 2 type stuff, and Zach Wheeler coming back from injury this year, who showed flashes of being a potential 2, 3, if not even an ace as well. And they brought back Bartolo Colon to fill in some of the innings gaps while if the starters need to skip anything. But my main issue with this team is I don't understand why they didn't spend money on a couple guys. I thought Upton would have been a very nice fit here. Obviously, they brought back Cespedes, but I just don't think he's a true center fielder. Neither is Upton, but if you want a true center fielder, big ticket, why didn't they go get Hayward?
Yeah.
I really like Conforto as a young guy. Travis Dionard, if he stays healthy, a catcher, is a fantastic hitter. Lucas Duda, where's his platoon partner? They're going to have to figure that out in camp. But obviously this team, they made a trade for Neil Walker, so they subbed out Neil Walker for Daniel Murphy. That's kind of maybe a little bit of a gain defensively, but a loss offensively, but it's going to be a push. They re-signed Cespedes, but beyond that, they did minor moves, and I'm very worried about the bullpen.
Yeah, for sure. And I understand your concern about Duda. They do still have Wilmer Flores behind him. They did sign Asdrubal Cabrera. So that's a guy who, could be a platoon at first when Flores is playing shortstop. Do still have Ruben Tejada on the team. Juan Lagares is still on this team. So they do still have some decent options. They also signed Alejandro Diaza. So there's a couple of guys in there that they kind of like. They also lost Tyler Clippard, Juan Uribe, Kelly Johnson, Michael Kadire retired, being probably one of the worst signings of all time. Really don't understand why they did that for such a smart organization in the last several years. To make that decision was kind of dumbfounding. But, they made the World Series with or without him. So, you really can't complain. So, as you mentioned, that rotation is the GOAT. It's brutal. It's the best rotation I've ever seen. As far as potential-wise, like 1 to 5, it is the best rotation I've ever seen. Now, will they fulfill that potential to the level of like the mid-90s Braves or some of the teams, that go back in the annals of time? I don't necessarily know. But, just looking at this roster on paper, starting pitching, DeGrom, Matt Harvey, Syndergaard, Matz, Colon, Wheeler, the names go on and on. They've got guys in their minor system that could probably even start for them now. So very deep rotation, very fluid. Is there anything else that you thought, like, were you at all upset with the trade of the loss of Jonathan Neese, or do you think that was just a necessary evil with all the depth?
No, with all the depth, they needed to replace Daniel Murphy because they didn't want to pay him, and Neil Walker's a very good player as well. No star, just like Daniel Murphy, but he, fills a gap for sure.
Absolutely.
Quick question. Would you be surprised if Noah Syndergaard had the best stats in this rotation this year? Because I wouldn't.
I wouldn't be surprised, no. I would be, I think that Harvey's going to be the lead dog. I think that's just his personality. I am a little bit worried about that bullpen, though. One of your best relief pitchers is Addison Reed. We all know what happened with Mujica, so that's crazy. I've never even heard of that before. He's only 27 years old. He's already banned for life from baseball.
Get your shit together, buddy.
He doesn't need to get his shit together. He can't get back in anywhere.
You can ask for reinstatement, I think, within 2 years.
Jeez. Well, how'd that go for Mark McGwire?
Well, it went really well for him.
He didn't try to get back in. But no, I am a little worried about their rotation. Not so much so because, let's face it, they'll probably pitch 1 or 2 innings a game. So it's not like it's that big of a deal. Their offense, we really like the progression of Conforto. Hopefully David Wright is recovered from the spinal stenosis that held him back. He was still extremely effective when he was starting.
I think that I've read multiple reports where they're going to try to work a resting program for him where
That's a
he
good idea.
skips at least one game a week in most cases, maybe more on road trips and less on home trips, but they're going to try to rest him a lot, which is good because they do have some infield depth with Flores and Tejada, and they can move. And Cabrera is a solid third baseman as well, so they can move things around. So
yeah, interesting. Before we move on, real quick, do you think that Curtis Granderson will repeat that great year he had last year?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, me neither.
I think he'll be still a solid regular, but I think that might have been his last great Grando season. So
and I lied actually. One more thing before we move on. Do you see one of these pitchers, and which pitcher do you think they deal at the deadline, if at all, for a major player? Because this is a team, we talked about the other day about Mike Trout. Who could possibly unload the prospects to get Mike Trout? I'm not saying that they would trade for him. I'm just saying now that we've had a chance to look at it, the Angels can rebuild very quickly.
Are you asking me to build a Mets-Angels trade off the top of my head?
I'm not necessarily asking. I'm just saying, do you see one of these pitchers getting moved because they could use a little bit more offense?
I don't think they'll move anyone during the season. I think after this season, they could totally look into dealing Matt Harvey for a big piece because he's a Boris client. There's been rumors, and there's been friction in that front office ever since the innings limit on him in that season, and he did not want an innings limit, even though Boris did, so there's always been friction. They do have a couple pieces deal. Trout's not getting moved this year.
I don't think they will
either. But could they trade Zach Wheeler and Dominic Smith, a great first base prospect, and maybe even someone like a Conforto? And that way you slide Cespedes over to maybe right, put Granderson left, put Trout in center with the Mets. That's a lot to deal, but if you want Trout, you got to deal a lot.
Yeah, I'm just saying, though, they could be the team. They could be the team. They have the pitching prospects where it wouldn't hurt them too bad. It would hurt them, definitely. But, you get your center fielder for the next 15 years. So, who knows? We'll see. But that just came to my head, and I thought, well, okay, if there is a team that could do it, maybe it is the Mets.
And speaking of getting your center fielder for the next 15 years, we're going to talk about the jump to the Chicago Cubs, the team that all the projection systems have winning this division. Obviously, they made big splashes this offseason. They signed super utility guy Ben Zobrist, who is most likely going to start at second base for the most of the time. They traded Starlin Castro to the Yankees for Adam Warren, who's a fantastic lawnman reliever / fifth starter when needed. I really like how he can bounce back in between. And they made two big moves against the big division rival, the St. Louis Cardinals. And they signed John Lackey away after his best season ever. And they signed Jason Hayward. So he's going to be moving to center field for the first time. So it's going to be interesting to see how the defensive metrics rate him and how he adjusts. But they signed him to a big 8-year contract. And he's going to be the center fielder. And it's going to be interesting to see how that whole team shakes out now that they're spending the money and they're officially, quote unquote, going for it now.
Yeah, absolutely. They did lose a couple guys like Jason Mott. They had picked up Fernando Rodney halfway through the season. They lost him. Tommy Hunter in free agency.
Sounds like they didn't lose anyone.
Well, they didn't lose a ton, but these are guys worth mentioning. They did lose Dexter Fowler and Austin Jackson, who are both still free agents, if you guys are looking. Dan Heron also retired. So this is a team.
Good career, Dan Heron.
Yeah, he had a good career. I always enjoyed watching him pitch. I'm a little sad that he kind of hung it up, because he was still relatively young in pitching years. But he had to do what was best for him and his family. So let's talk about this lineup. Do you think Kyle Schwarber is really the real deal, or do you expect him to struggle this year?
Schwarber's definitely going to struggle in the batting average department, but if I could easily see 250, 30 home runs, great power. Obviously, I think he is going to have to make that adjustment from catcher first base in college and coming up the minors to basically being their left fielder at all times with Coughlin platooning. He's going to have some adjustments to make, but that guy is legit power, and we saw that in the playoffs.
Absolutely. This lineup is just absolutely absurd. With how much potential is there? Lord knows if they fill it, it's gangbusters. It's a runaway show, even with the Cardinals in the division. This lineup is so good. Are you worried about their pitching? Because while John Lester is what you'd consider like a quasi ace, he's really not that much of an ace. He's a very effective guy, and he's a guy who you want trotting out in the postseason because of his experience. And Arrieta, by all means, was just amazing last year. But there are some projections that don't necessarily think that he can keep this up. We know that Cutter's already a top 5 pitch in baseball, so I would think that he does. But they're going to have to pay him too. But behind that, I mean, you got Lackey, who you're kind of relying on to have a great year.
He won't have that same year again.
No.
And I'm worried about my main worry with the rotation, besides its lack of depth, which they could easily trade for when you have someone with the upside of Javier Baez not even playing, who could hit 35 home runs as a second baseman, because he has, as some scouts have said, including Keith Law, I believe, of ESPN, that he has the best bat speed they've ever seen from an infield prospect, which, based off of watching him play, I completely buy that argument. But Lester's getting older. He could be starting his decline. Who knows? He is obviously, in my opinion, the 2 to Arrieta, but that big innings jump with Jake Arrieta does worry me. He looks like a big workhorse. He hasn't had injury issues since leaving Baltimore and coming to the Cubs. He's obviously amazing last year, won the Cy Young, but it's going to be really interesting to see how that arm deals with all those innings and how they accumulate. So
still a lot of questions in that bullpen as well.
Yeah, Hector Rodon is really good. Pedro Stoop is pretty solid as well, but there's not much. I mean, they have a lot of failed starters in that bullpen. The Trevor Cahill, Travis Wood, Adam Warren, Justin Grimm. It's all kind of like patchwork there, and I think they'll be able to figure it out, especially with Joe Madden running the show with the front office doing a great job. But there are concerns. This team is not perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, maybe we just got to cool the projections a little bit. But, I mean, at the same time, there's just so much to like about this team. And they showed so much last year. It's similar to the Mets, where you just kind of got to hope that they can keep it going.
And speaking of hoping to keep it going, we're going to jump to the St. Louis Cardinals really quick. They obviously were kind of gutted a little bit, and they were making big plans and big moves in the offseason, and a lot of them didn't work out. They had feelers out to Chris Davis reportedly. They definitely talked to David Price. They confirmed that themselves. But they lost, as we mentioned, with the Cubs, Lackey and Hayward, and they're going to really rely on that organizational depth and that great culture they've built to replace them for now. And speaking of replacing Lackey, Kyle, what are your thoughts on this rotation? There's a lot. Adam Wainwright obviously is coming back and hopefully can fill that ace role. Carlos Martinez faded down the stretch, but with the innings getting up there, maybe he can recover and sustain that near ace-like level for the whole season. They also, I mean, when they traded Shelby Miller, they did trade from depth, and now they lost Lackey, so it's going to be interesting to see how they make this rotation work.
I still really like the rotation. I loved the acquisition of Mike Leake. I thought that was a total, a great get for them. I think that he's a guy who's really helped them out. Obviously, Wainwright, I fully expect him to make a recovery. He's not a guy who ever relied on stuff necessarily to get him by. He's always been a very control-heavy pitcher.
Outside of that incredible curveball, which you saw in the playoffs still snapping like you expect, so that was a good sign.
Yeah, that's a swing and miss pitch, too. I guess I'm just like, you kind of associate stuff with velocity sometimes. So, certainly as that Michael Wacha, I think, you touched on him a little bit earlier. I think he's going to be a guy who continues to improve. He's one of those pitchers who he just pitches with a lot of pace, and he's got so much control and a pretty good set of velocity coming from him that he's going to be very effective for a very long time, even when his velocity falls off. And like you had mentioned, Carlos Martinez, I think he's an absolute diamond in the rough, if you can even call him that. He was so good last year. I think once he's had a chance to get stretched out, could be a Tommy John guy. Who knows? Knock on wood. I hate to say that about a guy, but I mean, if he stays healthy, that guy is going to jump the rotation big time. Total stud. And they got Jamie Garcia as well there. I still really like their bullpen. Rosenthal, to me, is still one of the best closers in baseball. He's done it time and time again. I know his ERA kind of spiked last year, but I think towards the towards the end of the year, he really started figuring it out, and that's what you want to see. So, they also acquired Jed Yurko from the Padres. You can say what you want about that. He was a pretty good player a couple years ago. Maybe St. Louis has a way of resurrecting these guys. I don't know if he'll even play over Colton Wong or play a little bit of split time with him, but I mean, he's an interesting guy that they did acquire. They also re-signed Jonathan Broxton, so that's interesting. They signed right-handed pitcher Swang Hwan Oh, so that's interesting. They did lose first baseman Mark Reynolds in free agency. So looking at this team, where do you expect them to finish?
I honestly expect them I think they're going to fall a little bit. I do love the rotation, but there's injury concerns sprinkled out this entire team. They're a little bit veteran now. They're counting on a lot of young guys to stay healthy and produce, like Steven Piscotty, Colton Wong, Randall Gerchek. I do like them all, but they haven't done it yet. I think they have a kind of a hole at first base. That Brandon Moss continues his downward spiral, and Matt Adams never really shows up. Yadier Molina is recovering from thumb surgery. Is he past his prime with all the games he's caught? That's completely a real scenario in my opinion. And, I just think that they had their time on the top, and now the Cubs are going to jump up there for a couple years, and the Cardinals are going to be back. And I love this organization, everything they bring to the game, including potentially looking at other teams' organization and what they're doing. And I would love to be wrong. I wouldn't be surprised if the Cardinals just win 102 games because they're the Cardinals, and that's what they do.
Yeah.
But I do think they will finish third in this division.
Yeah, they're an interesting team. Like you said, they're just getting older. I mean, you got Brandon Moss, first base.
Johnny Peralta is still playing shortstop defensively. He's been good the last couple of years, better than we expected when they signed that deal, but still, he could fall off a cliff at any moment with that body type.
And we don't even know what Matt Holliday is going to do. I mean, he's been banged up.
He was injured last year as well.
Yeah.
I mean, and once again, when we talk about these injuries, it just shows how incredible this organization is, how great they were last year.
They've overcome so much, so I wouldn't put it past them, to still win a lot of games, like you'd said. But at the same time, I just think that maybe this is a year they take a step back, especially losing out on, like you had mentioned, Price and Hayward. They were ready to spend some money this year. They had it in the budget, and they just weren't able to attract a free agent, which is very unusual for them. They're usually
think that they
major
just
destination.
didn't want to meet those numbers. And they had a line they wouldn't cross, and they did their job in not crossing it, and it bit them and not getting them, and they're dealing with it like they will.
Yeah, and they're fine to take a step back for a year. I mean, let's be honest. They're not going to get trapped in a 7-year deal for 1 year of success. Like, they more than happy to take a step back if they need to and reevaluate things.
And speaking of reevaluating things, we're going to jump to the Pittsburgh Pirates. They are used to dealing with the domination of the Cardinals, and they knew the Cubs were coming with their money and prospects, but they have continued to be right there in the wild card and division mix. They have some young players already on this team that are being great. They may have the most athletic and highest potential outfield in all of baseball.
Yeah.
They have a very good defensive infield as well, which helps out their fantastic pitching staff. And they have some young guys that haven't been in the majors yet that I think are actually going to really help them out. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Tyler Glasnow wins a rotation spot out of camp.
Yep.
And Josh Bell, I think, is eventually going to have that first base job in the platoon with John Jaso as well.
Machine.
But it's going to be really interesting to see because the back end of this rotation is very questionable. John Niche, as of right now, is projected to be their number 3 starter. Obviously, Garrett Cole, legit ace, workhorse, monster. Francisco Liriano, since he went to the Pirates, has been pitching like an ace ever since he was in Pittsburgh. So those two have been great. But after that, there's a lot of question marks in that rotation.
Yeah, Ryan Vogelsong, Jeff Locke, who knows if they can do it. We had mentioned they have some guys that they might call up to try and help supplement that. So they're usually pretty good about getting the most out of their pitchers. They have some really good pitching coaches. But we'll have to see. I mean, obviously the loss of A.J. Burnett hurts them. I really was hoping he was going to come back for one more year. He's just so much fun to watch pitch over there. He's just like the perfect Pirate. He's so Pittsburgh.
Quiet, unassuming, randomly will have an 8-inning, 3-hit, 12K game after getting blown up the next game. It just doesn't faze him. He just comes in and works.
He's a dude who will walk 3 straight guys and then strike the next 3 out. He's just so crazy. Like, A.J. Burnett loves Lamb of God and, like, heavy metal and, like, flies to crazy destinations to see these concerts. He's just, like, he's one of the true badasses, in the league. And he's just, I think when he went to New York, everybody kind of, like, thought he was going to be this ace, and it didn't really work out, and he got paid so much money. But, really nice back end of his career. It was really good to see that. So some of the other things they were able to do, we already mentioned Ryan Vogelsong, bringing him in, trying to recreate some of that magic from San Francisco a few years ago. They did sign Neftali Feliz, which I thought was moderately interesting.
I wrote that down because they always have a great bullpen. Mark Mellison is a solid closer. Tony Watson is one of the best setup men in all baseball, and they could potentially fix Feliz, and randomly he could have a great year in that bullpen.
Yeah. What did you think about them not offering a contract to Pedro Alvarez?
Wasn't surprised at all. I think they were done with his 240, 30 home run numbers. He didn't provide any defensive value, and
Is he still unsigned?
Yeah, he's unsigned still, and I was very surprised that
That's
AL team
crazy.
didn't pick him up for a DH role. I thought he could be a very good fit as a DH somewhere, and he hasn't been signed. Like I said, compensation, not wanting to pay players, teams tanking, all these reasons right now where the Braves, for instance, or the Reds are like, yeah, we don't want to sign a guy that might help us win one extra game for $3 million. We're just going to save the money and be bad because it's better for our rebuilding project.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to see how that labor agreement works out after this year. I think that they're going to fix some of these issues, but I like Pittsburgh a lot. I think they'll finish second. I think Garrett Cole could challenge for the Cy Young. McCutchen has a couple more great years in him at least. Marte and Polanco are poised to take another step forward, especially Polanco. And I think they're going to be able to survive offensively with those three while they wait for Khan to come back from an injury, and also maybe Josh Bell to step in or Jaso to take another step and continue to be an on-base machine. But it's going to be an interesting to see them scoring runs for sure with that infield they have right now.
Okay, perfect. Well, I want to touch on something real quick, and then I got a question for you. So, they did also lose J.A. Happ to the Toronto Blue Jays in free agency.
That's a horrible ballpark fit, by the way. Happ's going to have like a 4 or 5 ERA at
very
least.
surprised by that. But they are a smart organization, so, I mean,
they were, but now Shapiro's running the Blue Jays, and we'll see what he does now that he's the GM and the team president.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, they're poised to have a pretty good run this year, but we'll see. Like I said, I mean, they got a lot of questions. They lost Joaquim Soria and Joe Blanton in free agency. I think Soria is still a pretty good closer or setup guy, depending on what you want to use him for. So I think that was a bit of a loss. Now, my question to you was twofold. How do you feel about this infield? Do you think Josh Harrison bounces back? And how do you project Alan Hansen going into the future?
I think Alan Hansen's going to be a very solid second baseman defensively, and he'll have passable offensive numbers. He's not going to be a star, in my opinion. Josh Harrison, I think that one great year he had was a blip in the sky, kind of. I think he's a very solid third baseman. He'll provide okay numbers, okay defense, but they're not stars. And I think that those are two of the players where I'm like, if they outperform projections or maybe Hansen fulfills his potential as a top 100 prospect, they could really help the Pirates offensively, make up the gap for how good their pitching can be with that defense, because all of them are really good defenders. So especially that outfield, that's one of the best defensive outfields I've ever seen. All three of their outfielders can play center and be plus defenders in center. McCutchen might be their worst defensive outfielder, and that's not even a knock on him. And speaking of worst defensive outfielder, let's jump to the Milwaukee Brewers, another team in the NL tanking. This isn't going to take long to talk about. They just traded Chris Davis to the Oakland Athletics, as we touched on in the previous podcast. They still have Ryan Braun because no one wants to trade for him with his back issues and that contract. This team is obviously looking towards the future. They don't have that many young pieces up right now. They do have some prospects on the way, specifically Orlando Arcia, who can be playing shortstop by May for them and who looks like a big-time regular, a great defense, good runner, solid bat. But not much to talk about with this team, Kyle. I mean, they didn't make any moves. We're just waiting on them to kind of deal more pieces. Like, I think Lucroy is a big trade chip. Will Smith's a good reliever that could be a trade chip. And also, if someone wants to take the dip into the Ryan Braun swimming pool. But beyond that, they're going to be a really bad team. They're going to challenge for that number one pick.
Yeah, definitely. They signed Chris Carter, which was like a commitment to striking out this year.
Yeah, that's a commitment to, that is a homer ballpark, so maybe he hits 40 with 210 average, and they're just okay with it.
Maybe he gets hot and you get something for him, even if it's a B-level prospect or a B-minus. Maybe they get something for Will Middlebrooks if he gets hot. I mean, he's a former highly thought-of guy who hasn't done anything in a
I do
couple
like
years,
Jonathan VR a little bit, though.
Yeah.
I like that pickup for them, especially to hold down shortstop while Arcia gets developed.
Yeah, it was interesting. So, again, sorry, fans, just not a lot to talk about the Brewers. They're in a clear rebuilding mode. They got to find a suitor for that Ryan Braun contract. If he can stay healthy, they're going to jump on any deal that comes.
He's still a really good player when he's healthy, so he just got to prove he's healthy. And speaking of proving you're healthy, we're jumping to the Cincinnati Reds, and Joey Votto proved he was healthy. Had another near MVP season, fantastic year, and then the Reds decided they weren't going to challenge in this division with what they had, and they also were tanking this year pretty much. They traded Todd Frazier to the White Sox. They traded Chapman to the Yankees. There's heavy rumors right now that Jay Bruce is on the way to the Blue Jays. We're not going to touch on that much because we don't know what's involved or if it's even going to go down, but obviously this team's looking to make moves. They do have some nice young pieces, though. I think they're set up better than the Brewers as of now. They have some good pitching. Antonio DeSclafani's good. Raciel Iglesias showed a lot of promise last year. Robert Stevenson, if he can get his control down, has great potential. Jesse Winkler looks like a very solid regular in the outfield. Obviously, they have Jose Peraza as well, who they got in the Frazier deal. Billy Hamilton, if he could ever learn how to get on base, could steal 100 bags easy. Zach Cozart's a great defensive shortstop when he's healthy. Devin Mesoraco is a great hitting catcher if he can stay healthy as well. So this team is going to be really bad, but they do have a little bit more to play with than the Brewers and the Braves for sure currently.
Absolutely. There's a couple other guys here that are somewhat interesting. Tony Cingrani, who had that crazy K9 rate, 2 years ago.
And then he
struggled.
He had no idea where that fastball was going,
Yeah.
and he couldn't set up the slider anymore. I like the move to the bullpen. He could be a power closer.
Yeah, I'd still like to see him get a shot in spring training at the rotation.
Oh,
He's
always.
He's just so long and lengthy.
And there's so much more value as a starter.
And
as
he's
well.
so athletic that it looks like he can repeat that delivery pretty easy. So I would like to see him. And then they also acquired Brandon Finnegan from the Kansas
was
City
in the
Royals.
Cueto trade.
Yeah, it was. And I think that was
Former top prospect. Let's see if he can put it together as well.
Yeah, well, not really former. He was a 2014 draft pick. I mean, he played for the Royals last year.
Injuries.
They didn't wait though. They called him up immediately, and he was like, really, come to think of it, one of the first round picks to play that year in a long time that I can think of. I mean, nobody else comes to mind as like first round pick gets called up that year.
Every once in a while, a couple of years, you'll see a pitcher in the bullpen, like a Finnegan situation as well. But
he is a starter.
Yeah,
We'll see if he sticks there.
He'll have a job all year, hopefully, and we'll see if he can actually develop. I do have concerns on his development of becoming a top 3 starter potentially.
Yeah, I feel you on that, but he's still an interesting guy. We know how the Royals evaluate players, and they're pretty good at it. So, interesting guy there. Like you said, though, I think that they sped up the rebuilding project quite a bit, and I think that that's going to help them quite a bit. They still have Brandon Phillips as well. So
yeah, they.
Who knows if they get anything for him?
They had I think I read reports where they had at least 1 trade agreed on and maybe 2, and Phillips just doesn't want to leave and waive his no trade rights, and that's up to him. He's a big fan favorite. He loves it in Cincinnati, and maybe he's just okay playing out the contract and retaring in Cincinnati as a Red. And good for him if that's what he wants to do.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you look around, you see the way Barry Larkin is received there. It makes sense. It's a passionate fan base over there in Ohio.
Which is really weird because they're very smart and passionate, and then they hate on Joey Votto for not having 130 RBIs or something.
Yeah.
Hey, Cincinnati, if you want to trade him to Seattle, I'm more than okay with that.
Yeah.
We'll give you a James Paxton and pretty much anyone in our minor league system besides Tawan Walker, who's obviously not in the minors. But we'll trade anyone for Votto. Kick some money in. We'll give you a couple more prospects, too.
Shoot, if they would take on the Prince Fielder contract, we'd give him a nice prospect. Probably give him Joey Gallo, too.
Yeah, and then speaking of...
Would you do that if you were the Reds?
What?
Would you, just to dump Votto's contract, take on like a Prince Fielder type?
No.
And then take on a Gallo and potentially like a Chichi Gonzalez, who's a mid-rotation starter? Because right now as it stands...
I don't think the Rangers trade Prince. If they're going to make a major move like that, they're going to eat the money and trade the prospects and just put Votto at first. They'll trade like a Moreland and a Gallo and a Chichi or something, keep Prince at DH, put Votto at first, and just have that monster lineup. It makes no sense to trade Prince when he's still a great batter.
Well, he is, but I think the power's gone, and he's got, he's not valuable defensively.
That's why he's a DH.
Right, but it creates like a lot of problems in the lineup because DH is super easy to fill usually because I have Moreland there.
Don't tell that to Seattle and Oakland.
Right, but I'm just saying, like, as far as like the money, the Rangers don't have a ton of money. So I mean, I just thought, trade those contracts. It kind of eliminates the sting of the money because it's pretty fair. I think Prince is owed like 110 right now.
Yeah, if I had to pick a team for Votto, that's so hard because first with his contract, he is really great. He's worth the money, but the teams that are willing to pay a great first baseman like that, the money for the most part have one. The best fit is Boston, but they have so much money in Kung Fu Panda, and obviously they're going to have to eat that money because he's probably not going to be what he was 3 years ago. And Hanley Ramirez, who can still be a really good first baseman potentially because he has played shortstop, not great, but if you're athletic to play shortstop even passively, you can learn to play defense at first. Yeah, and he's a fantastic bat when healthy. So Boston seems like the perfect fit in terms of money and prospects, but I don't think they're going to deal for him right now. So
that doesn't make a lot of sense for them.
And speaking of a team that had a good amount of prospects that's not afraid to deal them, we're going to jump to Arizona. We already touched about how they traded a whole bunch of great prospects, including Sansby and Blair, to Atlanta. So let's not worry about the potential negative there. Let's talk about the positive of spending the money to sign Zach Greinke, trading for Shelby Miller. Patrick Corbin is returning from injury still, who showed a little bit last year of returning to what he was 2 years ago. That's a really nice 1-2-3, Kyle.
Yeah, and not to mention if Archie Bradley comes back, that's another guy that could be playing much better than his fourth spot in the rotation.
If he wins it. And Brandon Shipley's another young arm they kept who's really good. People hate on them for all the prospects they traded, and they probably were bad moves in the aggregate, But as well, they do have some young arms still, as we mentioned with Bradley Shipley. And if they're really trying to win now, I mean, if they win the World Series, doesn't matter how good Spansby is. So
Yeah, it doesn't matter at all.
but what does matter is this batting lineup, and it does look like potentially just a two-headed monster with a bunch of fill-in parts. And it's going to be interesting to see because A.J. Pollock, fantastic player, really stayed healthy and dominated last year.
Yeah,
one of the
amazing.
best outfielders in baseball. And speaking of one of the best players in baseball, Paul Goldschmidt got MVP votes on a losing team, and I believe he finished third in voting last year.
It's hard to do.
Absolutely fantastic first baseman. Wellington Castillo, after they stole him from the Mariners, was a really good hitting catcher. I don't know if that's going to sustain. I don't think it will. But beyond those big two, they really need Yasmani Tomas to show up with the power. He had a decent average, decent OBP, but that slugging percentage was not what they paid for. And if he can develop that power and be what they paid for, they have a really good chance of potentially sneaking in here and stealing this division.
Yeah, absolutely. And they were, they did trade for Gene Segura. That was an interesting move. They also got right-handed pitcher Tyler Wagner in that same deal. Now, when you look at some of these guys like Chris Owings, Jake Lamb, Nick Ahmed, David Peralta, how do you feel about their projections going into next year just very quickly? Do you think that this is a lineup they can compete?
I think this lineup is going to look like they compete just because they play an absolute bandbox of a home park in Arizona. I do not like a lot of those guys in terms of hitting. Nick Ahmed's probably going to be the utility guy. Owings is probably going to go to short with Segura going to second just because of defensive value. Segura is a guy that could be change of scenery guy potentially with all the stuff that went on with him in Milwaukee.
He was a
Unfortunately,
change of scenery guy when he got to Milwaukee.
yeah, and he does have potential. I don't know how much of that's going to be hitting based though. Brandon Drury, I think, is going to be that third baseman by the end of the year. Prospect, a good defender, solid bat. But the concern is depth in the organization, especially hitting. So it's going to be interesting to see how they challenge. And speaking of depth, we're going to jump to the Los Angeles Dodgers here. And all they do is sign foreign free agents. They just signed Yasiel Sierra, who's a Cuban pitcher. They signed Kenta Medea, who's the big Japanese pitcher this year, who could be another Kuma type. They signed Joe Blanton. They signed Scott Kazmir. They re-signed Brett Anderson. They still have Kershaw. They have Alex Wood, who won't even have a rotation spot. This team is just full of potential options, and a lot of those options are not going to help them drive in runs because this lineup looks like it has a lot of question marks on it.
Yeah, they also re-signed Howie Kendrick, Chase Utley. They were able to bring in Scott Kazmir, which I thought was a really nice move for them.
That Kazmir move's amazing.
That was a great move. They're gonna win games with their pitching. I mean, that's what they're gonna try to do. We don't know if that's gonna work out. I still personally really like the lineup. I mean, Grandal is a guy who he underachieved in San Diego for a long time, but
he had a good year last year.
He did have a good year last year, and I think that in a better lineup, you'd see even more positive results. We still got.
My concern with the lineup is there's just so many guys. It's going to be hard for a first-year manager and Dave Roberts to tell someone to sit. Their outfield is full of question marks, including Yasiel Puig, who if he obviously looks like he showed up to camp in great shape, great motivation. Hopefully he cleaned up his outside of baseball life to help him on the field. He could be an MVP type batter, but I mean, their number 4 hitter is supposed to be Corey Seager, one of their bigger guys. Everyone thinks he's an all-world potential MVP, and he very well may be, but you still have to see him do it, Adrian Gonzalez is getting older. It's Mr. Consistency, but you never know with the age. Same thing with Howie Kendrick. He had a solid year, but the power dipped for sure. Jock Peterson, is that dude going to learn how to not strike out? I mean, the walks are good, the power's great, but he started to get benched in the end of the year because his hitting just got so bad. Enrique Hernandez, is this guy going to be able to really do that again and be that good in the platoon? Justin Turner, is he going to do that again? Alex Guerrero, is that guy going to find a position? They have a lot of things they need to work out in camp, I feel like.
Still got guys like, Ethier, Crawford. So they have, a lot of options. I'm not overly concerned with them just because of the depth of the team. They do have a lot of depth, even if it's questionable depth. They did lose Jimmy Rollins in free agency. He just recently signed with the White Sox, which I thought was a very good move while they try to develop Tim Anderson. But trying to keep this focus on the Dodgers, I think that a lot of the moves they made this year were good. I think that they're trying to maximize their value by getting some of those foreign players. I liked bringing in Scott Kazmir. That was a much cheaper option than re-signing Zach Greinke We love their bullpen. Kenley Jansen, J.P. Howell. These are two guys that can anchor that. And, Jansen's obviously one of the most dominant closers in baseball. So I still like their team. They've underachieved, but I'm very excited to see what a post-Mattingly team looks like.
And speaking of underachievement, we're going to talk about the San Diego Padres. Obviously, they made a lot of moves last year. They tried to be good. That team and that city deserves a winner, especially since their football team's leaving because they want more money. And it didn't really work out for them. So what they decided to do, they decided to reset some things. And they made a great trade in terms of getting some youth and prospects in that system. And Craig Kimbrell, Margot and Guerrera, center fielder and shortstop, individually, they are great prospects. They're both top 50. They still have a lot of things to work out. This is a team that has some players of interest for other teams. There's been rumors about Tyson Ross and James Shields and Andrew Cashner all getting potentially traded in the offseason. They all could get moved at the deadline. Matt Kemp had a very solid bounce back year in San Diego. He could get moved at the deadline. Will Myers, is he ever going to show anything? Derek Norris is a solid hitting catcher. He could get moved. I think this is another team that's not tanking as much as rebuilding, but they're definitely most likely to finish last in this division.
Yeah, they still have a decent rotation. They made so many moves. I think that I got to heavily criticize them for not getting anything for Justin Upton when they clearly weren't really going to probably be in it.
They probably should have at the deadline at least flipped him for a B, B plus anything. I mean, they do get the draft pick, though, which is better than nothing, but still, it's nice. It's better to have those prospects you can evaluate after they're already in the minors as well. There's added value in knowing what they are and what they could potentially be.
Yeah, they signed Alexi Ramirez, who I think was a nice little signing there. A solid shortstop that they can flip at the deadline if he gets hot, as he has in several years at going into the All-Star break. They were able to get Christian Bethancourt from the Braves for Casey Kelly. We touched on that earlier. One of the things I thought was kind of interesting was that A's trade they made where they gave up Yonder Alonso and Mark Rosibinski, and they were able to get back Drew Pomeranz and Jose J. So kind of an interesting deal there. Pomeranz was like a former, seen as like a back to the rotation starter with maybe a little bit more upside. Now maybe he's going to be more of a reliever type. We don't really know with him, but he's still an interesting guy. They made so many moves.
Yeah, speaking of a reliever type, we're going to end this talk about the Padres pretty quick because not much to talk about, as you said, the rebuilding. But they're going to let Brandon Maurer, who's been a dominating reliever for them, they're going to allow him to try to start again. Yeah. And it's going to be interesting to see if he can get a fifth spot because he is potentially a very good starter in terms of K rate and consistency. He just has a hard time repeating that delivery, and he never really found a third pitch. But if he has worked on that in the offseason, he could be a potential sleeper for that rotation for them.
Do you think that Shields or Ross or Cashner is dealt? Because they're all kind of in that, Shields still has some time on his contract.
All three of them. All three of them.
Okay.
I think that...
that'd be good for them.
I think if they were to keep one to be Ross because he's younger and the best of the bunch, Cashner, I think is the most likely to get dealt this season in deadline, and that's just because Shields obviously declining a little bit, still an okay pitcher, but he does have that big contract. So I think Ross most likely to get kept, Cashner most likely to get dealt. And speaking of most likely to get dealt, the Colorado Rockies have decided they want to start drafting and signing really good prospects and rebuild their farm system while also trading Corey Dickerson for a overrated reliever in Jake McGee. Didn't really make any sense at the time. They also signed Gerardo Parra, who's I think is going to be a really good fit in Colorado and provide good value, but it seems odd that they're trying to rebuild while spending a lot of money when they still have no pitching. I mean, Jonathan Gray, Jeff Hoffman, Eddie Beller, all good prospects. Let's see them, sustain success in the majors. I think that this is a team where if they decide to, could flip a lot of their players, much like San Diego. Their keeper in this instance would be Nolan Arenado, though. That guy's a monster.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But I think they're just going to keep buying their time, try to stay competitive, and flip these players at the deadline in the next offseason. Obviously, there's been rumors about Carlos Gonzalez for about 4 years straight, kind of like Tulowitzki. And it's going to be interesting to see if Jose Reyes gets suspended for the potential domestic abuse allegations. But they really need to continue to do what they're doing, build a farm system, and try to get high upside pitchers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, looking at this rotation, Chad Bettis was a guy who doesn't have anything overpowering, but he was actually pretty good last year. There's a lot of Fangraphs guys who thinks he might actually have a little bit of a breakout. I don't know if that's true. This is just something I've heard. Jorge De La Rosa, I mean, he's a guy who, when he's on, he's on. They have Jordan Lyles, who they acquired in the Dexter Fowler trade a couple years ago. He's still kind of a solid starting pitcher who, with some upside, he's kind of young. They have Tyler Chatwood, who I don't know if you believe in him, but he's kind of interesting. I do like their hitting lineup. I actually really like it. I mean, Hundley's a good hitting catcher. Paulson was pretty solid last year. DJ LeMahieu was very surprising. And then obviously the outfield of Parra, Blackman, and Gonzalez is still pretty solid. I expect them to make a deal. They also do have Jose Reyes, who they traded for. But I do like their hitting lineup. I don't think the pitching stays there. That's why they're not going to be able to compete this year. But at the same time, I wouldn't be overly surprised if this was maybe one of the years where they have a random run. Now, given what Arizona did, that's gonna be tough.
They kind of seem, the Rockies kind of seem like a little bit to me opposite of the Indians in the AL in terms of they have potentially dominating hitting in terms of scoring a lot of runs. Obviously, Coors Field helps, whereas the Indians are most likely going to score runs, especially while Brantley's out. But they have some of the best pitching in baseball. Yeah. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do. I think they could challenge for something to be frisky, but I think it's more likely they're going to lose a lot of games 5-7.
Yeah.
And put up some good fantasy numbers, and you're just not going to want to look at any of their pitcher stats.
I could see that for sure. I'm just, there is like a little bit of wiggle room there. So there's only one team left.
And do you know what year it is, Kyle?
Do I know what year it is? I know it's an even year.
That's exactly where I was going. We are jumping to the San Francisco Giants. The year is 2016. Hashtag even year if you're a Giants fan on Twitter. And they did not like what happened last year. They were very motivated in 2015 to not follow the even year trend, and they wanted to be competitive, and they had injury issues. The pitching didn't develop outside of Bumgarner. No one stepped up. Kane couldn't recover. Tim Lincecum was officially done. Hunter Pence, as the one of their linchpins in the offense, was injured all last year. But they spent some money. They signed Johnny Cueto, Jeff Samardzija, 2 big-ticket pitchers. They brought in Denard Span in a deal. I really like that Span deal. Mm-hmm. Everyone is very concerned about Johnny Cueto and his arms issues, his innings, his struggles in Kansas City. But if there's one team that knows pitching, it's the San Francisco Giants. And the fact that the Giants invested that much money into Cueto, does that give you a little bit more faith in him potentially staying healthy, and maybe he was just dead-armed last year?
Yeah, I got to be honest with you. If he signed with a different team who I didn't have as much respect for, I would be tearing this deal apart. But because it is the Giants, they did a full comprehensive physical on him. They seemed comfortable with the move.
So if the Twins signed him to the same deal, I would be more concerned as well.
Very concerned. I would be very concerned.
Especially with the Twins not challenging, so I'm not trying to bring that up. But I just picked a team out of thin air.
Right, yeah. So, I mean...
Ricky Nolasco.
Were you... Yeah, right. Were you surprised that they decided to pass on re-signing Mike Leake and brought in Samardzija for that amount of money, considering what Leake got in St. Louis? Because that's another organization that's very smart. And so I was a little bit surprised to see...
I wasn't surprised at all. I think they wanted Samardzija more than Leake easily, and that's why they signed Samardzija before Cueto. I think they really believe that Samardzija is closer to the Oakland Samardzija as opposed to the White Sox. Going to the NL, not having to deal with the DH, going to a much better ballpark. I think his K rate is going to jump back up a little bit, and I think he's going to actually outperform Cueto, and I think he's going to be that number 2 and have his best year ever.
Yeah, well, and it's not like maybe Cueto was the guy. Either way, I was just a little surprised they didn't bring back Mike Leake. He just seemed to fit in perfectly with what they do. He just seemed like a very San Francisco Giants-esque pitcher.
He does seem like a Giants pitcher.
He also seems like a Cardinals pitcher, though. He does. I mean, that's just a testament to their organizations and the type of veterans they've been able to bring in over the years. Now, how do you feel about this lineup here? Obviously we know about Posey. Brandon Belt's been a guy who, has kind of been up and down in his career. Do you believe...
Brandon Belt's like the National League's Hosmer.
Yeah.
Just everyone's waiting for that, massive breakout year. I think Hosmer's better, obviously, but he's, everyone's like, Brandon Belt this year. He's 322 homers? No. I do like how Joe Panik and Matt Duffy kind of came, quote-unquote, out of nowhere. He really looked good. Brandon Crawford had an incredible first half and really slowed down the second half, but he's a great shortstop defensively, and he's really coming together with that bat. And with Span in the outfield, I kind of like the outfield where you have Pence, Span, Blanco, and Pagan, and they can all kind of switch off, give each other days of rest, and cover for injuries. I like this team a lot. I think them and the Dodgers and the Diamondbacks are all going to fight it out, and I think that it's going to come down to the Giants and the Dodgers, and they're going to figure out who wants to go to the wild card and who wants to win the division and who's going to be watching the playoffs at home.
Absolutely, and some of the other more notable things, real quick, is just that Jeremy Affeldt retired. Tim Hudson retired. They have not brought back.
Your boy Tim Hudson. Are you sad?
It was very sad. I mean, I am a huge Tim Hudson fan. I loved him ever since the Oakland days. I just think that he's just one of those guys who's just one of the good guys in baseball. Just a pitcher who really did it with, commanding stuff at the beginning of his career and just really reformulated himself without ever really dropping off a ton. Just, he's like that guy who's in the almost Hall of Fame. He's just he was so good for so long, but he's never quite elite enough maybe to have that Hall of Fame resume, but he's just one of those guys who could almost just get in on merit. I don't think he will. I'm just saying he's one of those guys.
If Kurt Schilling's not in the Hall of Fame, Tim Hudson's not in the Hall of Fame. And I think Schilling's the Hall of Fame.
Schilling's going to get in the Hall of Fame.
He better.
He's going to get in the Hall of Fame. That's ridiculous. And really quickly, how do you feel about this bullpen? We knew that Hunter Strickland was a major prospect. Got shelled in the playoffs 2 years ago. Hasn't really necessarily recovered from it as a prospect, but he throws gas. And obviously Romo and Casilla are guys that have done it before. But
who's going to be the closer this year? Because those dudes switch roles every 3 months.
That's kind of my question. So weird. Is Strickland going to differentiate himself as the top prospect for them?
I think that he's hopefully going to be that seventh inning question mark in terms of, is he going to strike the side out or give up 2 runs? Yeah. And I think he has potential to be more. But the bullpen and this pitching, it's something with the Giants, kind of like the Cardinals. I don't really worry about.
Yeah.
I mean,
it just works.
Yeah, they'll figure it out.
Romo will just go on a tear, randomly, and just be like, "Oh, my slider is really good."
And then all of a sudden he'll lose grip on the slider, and Casilla is going to have that sinker back, and it's going to work it out.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just what they do.
To pass the buck on. So interesting team. I really like them a lot, quite a bit. I think that Joe Panik and Matt Duffy were godsends for that team.
Oh, no doubt.
I'm sure they knew what they were doing. Obviously, they didn't re-sign Pablo, and they had a ton of money, so clearly they could have went out and got a guy last year. But they chose not to. They chose to be patient. Shows a calculated approach. One of the best managers in baseball, so I'm sure he'll get the most out of this lineup.
I completely agree. That wraps it up for the National League, Kyle. And we'll be back with a new episode next week. We're going to keep it under wraps and keep it as a surprise. But we will have a more thorough predictions and preview podcast for the Major League Baseball coming up in the next few weeks. Thank you for listening.
Peace.